racist cop sentenced to life in prison for pointing a gun at a military general during a funeral. When a U.S. Army general has to bury his son with his left hand and fight prejudice with his right, this country bears a wound deeper than any battlefield. The sky over Arlington that day was a dull gray, carrying the chill of early winter. But that cold could not compare to the hollow ache inside Lieutenant General Dylan Jackson, 58 years old, a man who had just lost the only thing that gave his life meaning beyond his rank. Connell Jackson. Connell was not just a son, but the living embodiment of a military ideal: integrity, loyalty, and unflinching courage. He died during an ambush in Manbij, Syria, on September 12th, part of an operation assisting allies in liberating the city's northern region. Connell had shielded 2 younger soldiers caught in crossfire with his own body, and was critically wounded when shrapnel tore through his aorta. He died less than 18 minutes later, before the medevac helicopter could land. General Jackson knew the precise timeline of his son's final moments, because he was the first to receive the classified field report. But it was only today that he truly confronted that loss. During a military ceremony he had overseen hundreds of times, yet never imagined would one day be for his own child. He wore full-dress uniform, complete with all 18 medals, the most prominent being the Silver Star, the Distinguished Service Medal, and the Purple Heart. But in his hand, he carried only one: the medal Connell had earned, but never lived to receive after that last mission, meant to be placed over the left breast of the oak coffin draped in the flag. His hand trembled slightly as he did it, then clenched with quiet resolve. Beside him sat Elela Nena, his partner of more than 32 years, silent, like a woman who had cried herself dry 10 nights ago. The black dress she wore today was the same one she wore during Connell's enlistment ceremony. Now it had become a symbol of the closed cycle between pride and grief. Maya, their eldest daughter, a civil rights attorney based in Washington, D.C., brought 2 suitcases, one for clothes, one for legal documents. To Maya, the tragedy of black soldiers in the military didn't end when their lives did. It carried on in how society treated their funerals, their honor, and the truth. She had seen it firsthand. White officers sent off in glory, while black servicemen, even those with rank, were treated with suspicion at every turn. Accompanying Maya was Tyler, 14 years old, the grandson of General Jackson. Tyler had once declared he would follow Uncle Connell into the Marine Corps, and since the day he received the news, he hadn't let go of his phone. The lock screen still a photo of Connell in uniform, beaming with pride after graduating from advanced tactical training at Quantico. The funeral was broadcast live on the military channel and streamed nationwide. The front row included the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and 12 generals representing all military branches. 4 35A jets roared overhead in the missing man formation, honoring the fallen soldier's departure. But while the cameras captured solemn ceremony, in a shadowed corner stood Officer Ethan Reynolds, a city police officer, silently tracking General Jackson's every move. Though officially assigned to funeral security, his mind harbored a darker scheme no one suspected. A scheme that, within minutes, would shock the entire nation and spill the blood of a war hero, right on the very soil meant to honor him. If you've been moved by this story so far, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, so you don't miss what comes next. Ethan Reynolds, 43, was a familiar name within the city's police system. In internal records, he was classified as senior mid-level, but to residents of the East Side, where most of the population was Black or Latinx, that name was synonymous with violence, intimidation, and abuse of power. Despite having been investigated for 4 complaints over 8 years, including one for assaulting a high school student and another for pointing a gun at a pregnant woman during a traffic stop, all were concluded as insufficient evidence of procedural violation. In reality, all 4 cases showed signs of being buried from the inside. At the station, Reynolds had a strange nickname, the East Side Punisher. No one said it to his face, but colleagues understood. It meant he was the one unofficially authorized to clean up neighborhoods the city management deemed socially unstable. He often boasted about his exploits with a half-joking, half-threatening tone. "If they don't obey, I'll teach them the law with the tip of my baton." When the personnel list was posted for the funeral security of Captain Connell Jackson, Reynolds saw the name Lieutenant General Dillon Jackson and cracked a crooked smile. To him, Dillon Jackson wasn't a respected 3-star general, but a symbol of everything he despised. A black man with power, with honor, and publicly celebrated. In private conversations, he had referred to the general as a monkey with stars on his collar. Just 3 nights before the funeral, at 1:23 a.m., he posted a meme, an image of a black soldier draped in a flag with the caption, "Pity Parade," in a private group called Real Police Truth, a shadow forum with over 900 members, all current or former law enforcement officers across the country. Within the group, discussions often revolved around tips for bending the rules to strike first, or mock videos of people of color being arrested. Under Reynolds's post, there were over 200 interactions, and one standout comment read, "Let the funeral be paid in blood." But he didn't stop there. At 9:47 p.m., the night before the funeral, he messaged a colleague in the special unit via Signal. "Tomorrow I'm on duty at the Monkey General's funeral. I'll make sure he remembers it." The recipient responded only with a thumbs-up emoji. No one reported it. No one intervened. Because they knew. Reynolds had protection. Rumors had long suggested that his brother-in-law was a senior political advisor in the mayor's office, and that a lawsuit once filed against him was mysteriously dropped after a call from above. That morning, the day of the funeral, Reynolds wore no badge, activated no body camera, violating 2 fundamental rules for police on official assignment. When questioned, he replied curtly, "Camera systems down." His superiors asked no further. He arrived at the cemetery at 8:12 a.m., dressed in police uniform, but with his badge number concealed by a cropped jacket, wearing gloves, sunglasses, and a mask bearing the symbol, "We own the streets," the motto of a shadowy extremist faction within law enforcement. He wasn't there to protect. He didn't bring grief. He came to mock, provoke, and desecrate one of the most sacred rituals in the U.S. military. As guests began to depart the area, he slowly approached the spot where General Dillon Jackson stood alone before the casket. His eyes betrayed unfiltered hatred. In his jacket pocket, the Glock .40 lay silent, its grip already turned for easy draw. No one knew that at the very moment of solemnity, when a father pressed his final kiss upon the flag-draped coffin, it was not a threat from a Middle Eastern battlefield, but from the decaying core of the domestic system that silently drew nearer, carrying what could only be called a premeditated crime. As the final note of the funeral bugle faded, volleys of honor guard fire cracked through Arlington Cemetery like a last salute to a fallen soldier. Hundreds of military personnel and dignitaries began moving toward their vehicles, but Lieutenant General Dillon Jackson remained, silently beside his son's casket. He removed his white gloves, the sinewed fingers trembling slightly as they touched the flag-covered oak. "I need a few minutes. Please let me be alone," he said, his voice low and fractured. No one responded, but he heard footsteps behind him, heavy, deliberate, and steady. The instinct honed by 36 years in the military made him alert, but he never expected evil to walk up to him in the most sacred moment of his life. The voice behind him froze the air. "You people should have been buried with your whole damn bloodline." Dillon turned slowly, His eyes no longer held tears, only a gaze cold as steel, sharper than the flag fluttering above. In front of him stood Ethan Reynolds. No hat, no badge, his right hand resting on the grip of a sidearm, lips curled in a sneer. "You're out of line, officer," Dillon said, his tone as calm as if he were still on the battlefield. "Someone like you doesn't get to give orders. I don't take commands from a monkey with stars." Reynolds spat each word, then suddenly drew his gun without hesitation, pressing it directly against the left side of Dillon's temple. The move was so swift, only those who had faced death could grasp how dangerous it truly was. The edge of the barrel cut into his skin, drawing blood, one drop, then two, seeping into the navy blue uniform and spreading slowly across the purple heart pinned to his chest, the same medal he'd earned for rescuing 4 comrades under artillery fire in Kandahar back in 2007. And just 20 meters away, behind the old pine trees lining the burial site, 14-year-old Tyler, Dillon's grandson, was hiding behind a tree, hands trembling as he gripped his iPhone. Tyler hadn't been allowed to leave the car, but worried for his grandfather, he had quietly followed without anyone noticing. The moment he saw the gun rise, Tyler almost screamed, but managed instead to hit the record button. In the video, barely 2 minutes long, everything could be heard. The soft click of the safety disengaging. Reynolds' voice, laced with hate. "Want to die beside your son, is that it?" And the sound of metals clinking against stone as Dillon stood his ground, staring down the barrel of a gun he had faced countless times in service, but never imagined would come from a fellow American uniform. Dillon didn't draw his weapon. He didn't resist. He stood firm at attention, whispering only, "Pull the trigger, but you won't kill the truth." At that moment, a military police officer named Jared Lohman, assigned to second-layer security, noticed the abnormal behavior from afar and moved in fast. But Reynolds was faster. He stepped back a few paces, laughing loudly, then shouted, "He attacked me first, tried to grab my weapon." A blatant lie thrown out, confident no one had proof. But Tyler did. And within 30 seconds of Reynolds fleeing the scene, the boy had sent the video to his mother, Maya. Maya, seated in the back of the car, watched the footage with hands trembling so violently, she nearly dropped the phone. Without hesitation, she called Breonna Mitchell, the state prosecutor and former college friend and civil rights ally. The call lasted exactly 49 seconds. Within 10 minutes, the video was transmitted through the Federal Department of Justice's internal system. While Ethan Reynolds was still smirking, thinking his lie had ended the career of the 3-star monkey, he didn't realize the evidence had already left the cemetery before the blood on the metal had even begun to dry. The video was exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds long, recorded by Tyler on an iPhone 13 Pro in 4K at 60 frames per second. Unedited. Uncut. It began with a shot from behind Lieutenant General Dillon Jackson and ended with the frantic breaths of a child watching blood drip from his grandfather's forehead. Less than 6 minutes after Maya shared it with the internal group, the footage was posted on Platform X, formerly Twitter, at 4:14 p.m. by an independent journalist named Cynthia Huang, known for covering police violence cases in Minneapolis. No one expected that just 3 hours later, the clip would hit 10 million views and trend in 38 countries. By 10 p.m. that evening, it had surpassed 40 million views, accompanied by hundreds of thousands of shares, analyses, and furious comments. The hashtag number Justice for Dillon Jackson surged to #1 globally, bringing with it related tags like Veterans Deserve Respect, End Police Impunity, and Honor Over Hate. CNN broke into regular programming at 5:40 p.m. with an urgent broadcast. BBC, Al Jazeera, and even Japan's NHK covered the story during prime time. On screens around the world, people watched a white police officer pointing a gun at a black lieutenant general inside the nation's military cemetery. No excuses. No edits. Initially, the Metropolitan Police Department issued a brief statement. "We are currently investigating a complex situation that occurred during a national funeral. We urge the public not to jump to conclusions before the facts are confirmed." But just 2 hours later, an anonymous account leaked an internal email showing that Reynolds' superiors had ordered a full wipe and audit of his body cam footage, phone data, and radio logs. There were also efforts to fabricate an audio recording describing Dillon as having acted threateningly and Reynolds as being forced to respond in self-defense protocol. That lie began to crumble when another source, cemetery security footage, captured most of the incident from a different angle. This footage clearly showed Reynolds approaching aggressively, drawing his weapon despite zero provocation from General Jackson. Even more damning, in the original video's audio was the voice of Tyler, his trembling, tear-choked plea, "Please, don't shoot my grandpa." That single line, spoken by a child, became the spark that ignited an entire system's denial of truth. The response from the military community was tidal. More than 2,100 active duty officers, including Marines, Army soldiers, and Special Operations personnel, signed an open letter to the Secretary of Defense. The letter, published in the Military Times, bore a bold headline: "We will not stand behind a nation that honors those who assault those who gave their lives for freedom." Black veterans, from Vietnam to Iraq to former Afghanistan commanders, took to the streets in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Chicago, New Orleans, Houston, and especially Baltimore, the site of the Freddie Gray case. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, issued an emergency statement, stressing that the assault on a senior officer during a funeral is a desecration of military honor and a grave violation of human rights. Within 48 hours, over 310,000 signatures appeared on a petition demanding federal criminal charges against Ethan Reynolds. The media dug deep into Reynolds' past. What they uncovered enraged the public further. Over 6 years ago, he had been accused of twisting the arm of a black man in the street for daring to ask for directions without permission. The lawsuit was dismissed for lack of evidence. But now, justice lacked no evidence. Every second of that video, every curl of Ethan's lip, every drop of blood from General Dillon's forehead, and every desperate cry from Tyler unmasked a system built on denial, justification, and the erasure of black lives from the living record. And from that moment on, the pressure on the U.S. legal system began building like a tidal wave. No one, not even those at the highest levels, could look away any longer. At exactly 8:10 a.m. on Thursday, a federal summons was officially signed by Judge Rosalind Carter. Ethan Reynolds was ordered to appear before the Eastern District Federal Court, facing initial charges that included armed threat against a senior military officer, violation of national security at a military cemetery, and specifically, a hate crime under 18 U.S. Code, Section 249. Reynolds appeared at the emergency hearing in a gray suit, no badge, and without escort from the police department. A crowd of reporters swarmed him as though he were the epicenter of a national scandal, because in truth, he was. But what surprised everyone was this: he showed no sign of fear. On the contrary, he smiled, a smile cold as steel. In his hand, he carried a thick folder containing commendation certificates from his 20 years of service, letters of praise from a former police chief, and even a recommendation letter from a former state senator. But none of it could erase the truth. The video had clearly shown him drawing a gun and hurling slurs directly in front of a camera at a place considered sacred by the nation. What stunned the court into silence was a petition signed by senior officers themselves, calling for Reynolds' permanent suspension. Among the signatures was Lieutenant Marcus Hall, who had once been Reynolds's direct supervisor 6 years earlier. In the petition, Marcus wrote, "We once covered for him to protect the department's image, but the truth is, he's not just prejudiced, he's dangerous." Immediately after the initial hearing, the FBI stepped in. Media outlets reported that agents searched Reynolds's residence in Fairfax, seizing 3 phones, 2 computers, and an encrypted hard drive. Within 24 hours, the digital forensics team working with the prosecution discovered that Reynolds was an administrator for 2 extremist online groups, Honor Shield and The Grey Wall. These platforms trafficked in racist memes, maps tracking the movements of black protest groups, and internal plans to disrupt black funerals covered by the media. At the same time, Breonna Mitchell held her second press conference. She announced that 6 other officers from Reynolds' unit had been temporarily suspended for participating in the same racist group chat. More importantly, one of them, Lieutenant Greg Summers, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Greg testified that Reynolds had premeditated his attempt to send a message to General Jackson. 3 days before the funeral, during an unofficial meeting, Reynolds was reported to have said, "If those star-wearing bastards don't know fear, I'll teach it to them." This testimony, backed by a leaked audio recording from a hidden device, was quickly forwarded to the Department of Justice. Immediately, the Secretary of Defense initiated discussions with both the FBI and CIA about whether a broader conspiracy existed within security forces to intimidate black military officers. While the corridors of the courts and government were set in motion, the public did not stay silent. In Newark, Detroit, and Oakland, black veterans marched repeatedly, holding high a slogan, "A loaded threat at a cemetery is a real bomb to justice." Meanwhile, Maya Jackson, in an interview with PBS, delivered a statement that forced all of America to reflect. "If a police officer can point a gun at my father, a man who spent his life serving the flag, what do you think they do to an ordinary black person in a dark alley when no one's recording?" That question needs no answer. It stands as the harshest indictment, not just of Reynolds, but of the entire system that raised and protected him for over 2 decades. On February 29th, at the Eastern District Federal Court, the official trial of Ethan Reynolds commenced. Every seat in courtroom number 3 was filled by 5 a.m. Hundreds had lined up overnight, including veterans, law students, and international journalists from BBC, Le Monde, and even Al Jazeera. Outside, across the square from the courthouse, a massive banner hung. "Justice fears no uniform, only silence." The case was initially assigned to Judge Frank Winters, but he was removed after an internal investigation revealed he had concealed financial ties to the far-right police organization Blue Guardians, which Reynolds had secretly funded through anonymous donations. He was replaced by Judge Sofia Rodriguez, 52, of Puerto Rican descent, one of the few female judges known for delivering maximum sentences in federal hate crime cases. Right from the opening statement, Breonna Mitchell stood before the jury and declared firmly, "I'm not just prosecuting a man. I am confronting a system, a machine that has punished the innocent solely for the color of their skin. And today, we end that paralysis." She presented the 1-minute 42-second video recorded by Tyler, but this time, the footage included clear subtitles, enhanced audio, noise reduction, and AI forensic facial analysis. Every word Reynolds spoke, from "you uniformed monkeys should be buried alive," to "on your knees, you're a fake soldier," was exposed under the light of science, irrefutable and raw. 13 witnesses were called, among them Major Daniel Stokes, who had been on external security duty the day of the funeral, confirmed that there was no threat or suspicious behavior from General Jackson. Linda O'Hara, coordinator at Arlington Cemetery, testified that Reynolds left his post without notification and violated the high security protocol entirely. Emergency medical responder Julia Tran, who treated Dylan Jackson's wound, presented the injury report. The tear at the temple indicates a blunt mechanical force, possibly from the muzzle of a firearm, pressed directly against the skin. Maya Jackson also took the stand. She did not cry, nor did she tremble. With a voice sharp as steel, she said, "My father once commanded thousands of troops in Syria, yet he was treated like a nobody in a national cemetery. Not because he was wrong, but because he wasn't white." Reynolds, dressed in a light gray suit, remained silent throughout the morning session. But during his cross-examination with Breonna Mitchell, his composure cracked. When Breonna asked, "Why did you draw your gun during a national memorial service without having reported any prior threat?" he snapped, "You better watch yourself. Everything is rigged against your kind." That sentence echoed through the courtroom like a blade cutting through his own defense. The entire jury turned toward each other. No more doubt. His choice of the phrase, "your kind," loaded with prejudice, intimidation, and hate, was no longer a theory. It was the unconscious confession of a man who still believed himself above the law. The court went on to clarify further details. Reynolds had failed to activate his body cam, abandoned his assigned security post, and more crucially, breached national security protocols designated for the funeral of high-ranking officers, violations that went far beyond procedural error. These were deliberate, systemic acts, fueled by hatred. By the end of the day, CNN opened its evening broadcast with a red headline, "Day 1 of Reynolds' trial. The system can't stay silent forever." One police officer might be prosecuted, but what about the dozens who enabled him for over 20 years? That was the question Breonna Mitchell would not let the country forget in the days to come. On the 17th day of the historic trial, the courtroom fell into breathless silence as prosecutor Breonna Mitchell called the next witness, Sergeant Devontae Ellis, 29 years old, who had served under Reynolds in Unit 12 for nearly 4 years. Devontae stepped onto the witness stand with a resolute expression, his eyes weary, those of someone who had been silent for far too long. He called it the stray dog log, Devontae said evenly. Every time he arrested a black person without just cause, he'd mark it with a red skull. I saw at least 36 marks in 2020 alone. The revelation froze the entire courtroom. Breonna requested a projection of a scanned page from the handwritten logbook, secretly photographed by Devontae before he requested a transfer. On it, the scrawled entries were disturbingly clear. Kid with the coiled hair, fast legs but stubborn. Done. Guy in green hoodie. Slow response. Don't bother asking why. Each skull, each red ink stroke, was evidence of the rot embedded in daily police operations. The next witness was Sarah Kim, an IT technician responsible for internal data security at the department. Her voice trembled with stress as she recounted during her examination. After that funeral, I was called into the office. They told me to clean Reynolds' internal server. In the message folders, I found 12 chat logs containing memes mocking black people in military uniforms, with captions like, "dressed like soldiers, but still field rats." I was ordered to delete them all before the official report went to the mayor's office. The outrage didn't stop there. Breonna revealed classified financial documents, records of a $175,000 transfer from the Southeast Police Union to a company named Lucent Civic Services, a shell organization run by the brother-in-law of former Judge Frank Winters, who served as its executive director. The money was transferred 5 days before Winters declined to indict Reynolds the first time. The question was no longer, was the system complicit? But how many layers deep does this web of deceit go? While truths were shaking the foundation of justice inside the courtroom, a new shock unfolded outside. Tyler Jackson, the 14-year-old boy who recorded the fateful video, was rushed to the hospital with a broken arm and a head wound. Initial police reports claimed it was a bicycle collision. But footage from a street camera showed a black pickup truck without license plates, suddenly veering and cutting off Tyler as he rode to school. No warning, no sign of braking. Dylan Jackson, though retired from service, immediately filed for emergency federal protection for his entire family and submitted a 64-page report to the Department of Homeland Security outlining organized acts of retaliation that posed a direct threat to witnesses' relatives. At a military hospital in Bethesda, Tyler woke up, his arm wrapped in white gauze. When asked if he was afraid, he silently turned his face away. But when Maya entered the room, he pulled a small piece of paper from beneath his pillow. On it, he had sketched the scene of his grandfather standing before the muzzle of a gun. At the bottom, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "No one should see their grandpa like that, but I'll go back if I have to again." The media called Tyler the boy who wouldn't back down. But to Breonna, Maya, and Dylan, he was more than a hero. He was living proof that the next generation would not accept silence the way the last one did. And if that old system hoped to survive through forgetfulness, then now it was being unmasked through every testimony, every line of code, every clip of video, and the blood of a child who refused to be broken. Sentencing day. A heavy Tuesday morning, the sky over Arlington was cloaked in a thick layer of gray clouds, as if even the air itself was waiting for the verdict. In front of the federal courthouse, over 2,000 people gathered, nearly 800 of them veterans clad in their old uniforms, medals pinned to the left side of their chests, all standing in rows, motionless. They didn't chant. They simply held up photographs of Captain Connell Jackson with a simple yet weighty message: "You are not alone." Across the barricade stood the Stand with Blue group, no more than 60 people, mostly holding banners in support of police, including one that read, "Reynolds is America's protector." But this time, not one of them could drown out the silence that filled the atmosphere. At 9:31 a.m., the courtroom session officially began. The jury took exactly 7 minutes and 18 seconds to read the indictment of 12 charges, ranging from intentional assault, hate crime, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, to abuse of power. When the foreperson of the jury uttered the final 3 words, "Guilty," on all counts, the courtroom froze for a brief 3 seconds. No sound, no movement. And then came the collective exhale. Not a cheer, but the breaking of sobs. Raw, heavy, a cathartic release for years of silent endurance. Maya clutched her father's arm, tears falling without end. Tyler, with his arm still in a cast, raised his thumb skyward. Ethan Reynolds bowed his head in the defendant's seat, his eyes empty, yet he forced a cold smile. When Judge Sofia Rodriguez looked him straight in the eye and delivered the sentence, she said, "Life imprisonment. No parole. No clemency." Every act of bigotry protected by a badge, encouraged by the system's silence, will today be judged to the fullest extent. Behind them, some uniformed officers lowered their heads, but a few quietly removed their badges from their lapels, as if to say, "I do not belong to that system." As Reynolds was handcuffed and escorted away, he paused for a second and turned toward General Dylan Jackson. His voice rasped, "This isn't over." Dylan stood, not with anger, not with fear. He simply replied, each word sharp and steady, forged from decades of combat resolve. "No." But justice has begun. In the press briefing after the trial, Breonna Mitchell declared, "We won't stop here. Every distorted file, every silenced witness, every miscarriage of justice in the past 20 years, we will reopen them. The system will no longer be a sanctuary for those who wear justice as a mask to commit crimes." National television outlets broadcast the news simultaneously. CNN ran the headline, "Officer receives harshest sentence in modern racial discrimination case." The New York Times wrote, "This is not just a verdict against Reynolds. It's a verdict against an entire apparatus that has stayed silent for too long." Meanwhile, across social media, the hashtag number Connell lives on surged with more than 18 million shares, including a post from Tyler. "I couldn't save you, Uncle, but I didn't let them forget you." As the evening sun cast its light across the plaza, the shadows of old soldiers stretched across the ground, silent, proud. For the first time in many years, they witnessed a verdict that not only said the right thing, but did the right thing. That morning, by 6:30 a.m., crowds had already begun gathering at the square in front of the Arlington Federal Courthouse. The line stretched over an entire city block, mostly veterans from all generations, some with silver hair, some young reservists, some leaning on canes, others on crutches, but all dressed in uniform, medals gleaming across their chests like living testaments to old oaths. In their hands were banners that needed no chance. Justice for Connell. Badges don't hide hate. We once held rifles to defend America. Today, we stand here to defend the truth. On the other side of the security barricade stood a pro-Reynolds group of around 70 people, waving Blue Lives Matter flags, stand with blue banners, and caps reading, "Police are the front line." They stood silently. A few whistled as the veteran procession passed, but none dared raise their voice. For the first time, they were the minority, both in number and in presence. Inside the courtroom, where there were 134 seats, every single one was taken. In the front row sat the Jackson family, Dylan in the center, holding hands with Maya and Tyler, the boy's arms still wrapped in bandages, his face steeled like a young soldier. At 9:41 a.m., the forewoman of the jury, a white-haired woman named Margaret Leland, rose. Her voice didn't shake, didn't rise, but rang out with clarity in every word. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ethan Reynolds, guilty on all 12 charges." No applause, no loud weeping, but a profound sense of relief filled the courtroom, like the entire country had finally loosened a knot that had been strangling it for decades. Judge Sophia Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Her voice was firm as steel. "Mr. Reynolds, you used the authority granted to you to commit a grave act of racial hatred at one of the most sacred sites in our nation. You did not merely insult an individual, you insulted democracy itself. With full evidence, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment, without parole, and without any form of sentence reduction." Ethan Reynolds, the man once nicknamed the East Side Punisher, turned his head toward General Dylan Jackson. Under the harsh courtroom light, he gave a faint, defiant smirk, clinging to his last shred of arrogance. This isn't over, but Dylan, in full military dress, slowly rose and looked straight at the man who had nearly killed him in front of his grandson. His voice was low but unwavering, as steady as the commands he once issued across the deserts of Syria. "No, but justice has begun." Outside, the sun began to break through. A child in the crowd called out, "Connell lives on!" and the whole square responded in unison, without organization, without loudspeakers. "Justice for Connell! Justice for Dylan! Justice for us all!" The media moved swiftly. CNN called it the harshest sentence ever handed down to a police officer for a hate crime in peacetime history. The New York Times ran the headline, "The day the system stood trial before the people." And across social media, the hashtag number Justice for Jackson reached 22 million shares in 24 hours, accompanied by a photo of Dylan shaking hands with a Latino veteran beneath a billowing American flag. But the image that spread most powerfully was Tyler, his arm still in bandages, holding up a phone to record the moment of sentencing. In the video, he whispered, "Connell, we did it, Grandpa. Justice does not bring back the dead. But that day, it restored the honor of a medal, returned the voice of a generation, and etched into history a lesson that cannot be erased." Finally, something had begun to change. Join us in sharing these powerful stories by liking and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with deeper lessons and heartfelt empathy.